We're going to jump right in since we're getting a little bit of a late start. We've got a fair amount of material to cover tonight. And for a change, I actually do have a little bit of a PowerPoint for you. So hopefully I've actually got it in order. We'll see. Okay, last week we got going on our Christian evidences talk again, and we focused mainly on unbelief. We talked about how the modern world is increasingly one of unbelief. We talked about how faith is quite clearly under assault, or faith in God is under assault. Actually, faith in almost anything is under assault. And the time is now for all of us, for any responsible person to fortify their mind, to gain the knowledge with evidence that we can present to those in the world that want to say that God doesn't exist, He can't exist, or whatever it may be. The word unbelief it's very complex, and unbelievers come in a lot of different varieties. We talked a lot about a lot of those: atheists, skeptics, agnostics, all those things. And each one of those philosophies is just dead wrong, and it will lead only to eternal ruin. Man is curiously awed by a sense of the divine, and we have an incurable urge to believe in a higher being. But not only do some people want to believe in a higher being as in a human, but there are also some that will assign this higher being to inanimate objects. And one of the most common is Mother Earth, that many in the environmental movement will profess as the supreme being. But why do people turn to atheism? Well, let's see. They don't want to believe. Okay, I did get behind already. See, I'm out of practice here. Why do people turn to atheism? Well, okay, first of all, we talked about how they're trained that way. It starts at a very young age. Either the parents just do not teach them the way they need to, teach them the Bible or anything like that, or it could be that they're just trained to not believe God in the public school system or any other school system for that matter. Also, another reason is just pride. Mankind can be very prideful, and we want to think that we are the most important thing in our lives and that we control everything. But more commonly, it's to be free of any moral responsibility. People do not like being told how to live, what they should be doing, and because of that, a lot of them turn away from the idea of a higher being. And then some will also, either by a perceived notion or actual really observing hypocrisy of those who profess to believe, that can really turn some people away. We spent the remainder of last week's class talking about the problem of suffering and the presence of evil in the world as a reason why people choose not to believe in God. But tonight we're going to talk more about some things that we can observe in this world that are not easily or even possibly explained by the concept of evolution. And we're going to look at these things as, could this be random chance or is it by intelligent design? And we're going to start off talking about a flower. The yucca flowers, as you see here, are quite unique. It did actually show up good. And they're unique in that they cannot be pollinated by a single insect, or they can only be pollinated by one single insect, and that is the yucca moth. The physiological design of the yucca flower makes pollination impossible by conventional means. And going back to your junior high science class, commonly insects such as honeybees pollinate plants as they fly from flower to flower seeking food. Most of the time with honeybees and both honeybees and the plants that they land on benefit from the bee's activities. The honeybee gets some food and the plant gets pollinated. Honeybees collect pollen from the anthers, which is the male reproductive part of the flower, and a special pollen basket on their hind legs. And they can take that back to their hives for the bees to use. But bees are kind of messy gatherers, and because of that, the pollen from the plant gets stuck in the hairs of their bodies. So when the bees visit the next flower, some of that pollen brushes off onto the flower. If it sticks to the stigma, or the female reproductive part of the flower, pollination will actually take place. Hundreds of varieties of plants are pollinated in this way. Pollination of the yucca flower is different, and that is that when the yucca moth comes to a yucca flower, which there is a yucca caterpillar and yucca moth, when it comes to a yucca flower, it collects the balls of pollen and then lays eggs in the ovary of the female part of the flower. And afterward, it climbs to the top of the female part of the flower and places the ball of pollen on the stigma, exactly where it needs to be in order for pollination to occur. Once it is pollinated, the yucca flower can produce seeds in its ovary. The yucca moth caterpillars, as you see there, eat some of the seeds, but many of the seeds are left over to produce other yucca plants. Because the yucca moth caterpillars eat only yucca seeds, and because the yucca plant is pollinated only by yucca moths, the moths and the plant depend on each other for survival. This symbiotic relationship demonstrates the complexity and the obvious design observed throughout nature. Evolutionists would have us believe that this pollination process came into existence by a mere chance over millions of years. Yet, if you think about it, both the moth and the plant are vital to one another's existence, and neither could have waited for the other to evolve. If we attribute the pollination process of the yucca plant to design, then that leads to a question as to who is the designer. Where we see evidence of design, it only makes sense to look for a designing agent, whether it be a house fashioned out of tongue depressors, as many of you have probably made over the years with your children, or a stealth fighter, which we're flying around a lot today. Someone is and was responsible for the overall design of the finished product. For instance, if you're walking through the Sahara Desert and you came across a laptop computer or something like this, a tablet, we would recognize immediately that tablet, that computer, was the end product of design and manufacturing. But what about things that are not man-made? What about the universe? What about the human body? Things that aren't thought of as being man-made. Evolutionists quickly disregard any notion that either the universe or the human body shows any signs of intelligent design, because they realize the implications of such a notion. By admitting there is inherent design, whether it is the usefulness of the human hand or just the right atmospheric conditions on Earth for life to exist, the necessity of an intelligent designer immediately arises. So, go back to your junior high science class again, thinking about how the Earth, how it is slanted on its axis exactly right, at the tilt of 23.5 degrees. If it were not tilted, but instead sat straight up in its orbit around the sun, there would be no seasons. The tropics would be hotter, and the deserts would be bigger. If the tilt moved all the way over to 90 degrees, much of the Earth would switch between very cold winters and very hot summers. In addition, the Earth is 240,000 miles from the Moon, whose gravitational pull is responsible for ocean tides. If the Moon were to be moved closer to the Earth by just 1/5, the tides would be so enormous that twice a day they would reach 35 to 50 feet high over most of the Earth's surface. Yet, evolutionists, they're unwilling to acknowledge the obvious design in the exact placement of the Earth and how it's oriented and the Moon. But the more that design is discovered in the world or in the universe around us, the more evolutionists are faced with the daunting task of trying to dream up realistic explanations of how it is that so many things in nature have precisely the correct measurements and or relationships. We talked about a lot of these in previous quarters, last winter and fall and winter. But the statistical probability of everything happening by random chances, it's unthinkable and impossible. Even evolutionists, in their more candid moments, are willing to admit as much. Richard Dawkins of Oxford University noted, "The more statistically improbable a thing is, the less we can believe that it just happened by blind chance." Superficially, the obvious alternative to chance is an intelligent designer. He said, "We suggest, however, that it is not at all superficial to attribute purposeful design to an intelligent designer. Rather, the available evidence permits no other rational conclusion." So, I think most of us would agree with that. So, let's take a look at a few pieces of evidence. And one of those would be the human body. In speaking of the human body, one evolutionist wrote, "When you come right down to it, the most incredible creation in the universe is you. With your fantastic senses and strengths, your ingenious defense systems, and mental capabilities so great that you can never use them to the fullest. Your body is a structural masterpiece, more amazing than science fiction." It's a good way of putting it. Could a rational person really be expected to conclude that the structural masterpiece that he talks about here, that the one that we call the human body, with all of its ingenious systems and highly endowed organization, is the result of undirected evolutionary processes operating over eons of time in nature? Or is it more logical, make more sense to conclude that the body is the end result of purposeful design by a master designer? From an organizational standpoint, the human body may be considered at 4 different levels. Again, some of this will sound like a review because we did talk about it to some degree earlier. First are the cells, which represent the smallest unit of life. Second, there are tissues. It's muscle tissue, nerve tissue, etc., which are groups of the same types of cells carrying on the same kind of activity. Third, we have the organs, the heart, liver, lungs, etc., which are groups of tissues working together in unison. And fourth, there are systems, whether it be reproductive system, circulatory system, etc. And these are groups they're composed of groups of organs that are carrying out specific bodily functions. To the unbiased, it should be obvious that the physical body has been marvelously, tough word to say, designed and intricately organized for the purposes of facilitating human existence on the earth. So let's get in there a little bit more detail. Here you see the human cell, and you will be tested on this later. So, the human body is composed of over 250 different kinds of cells: red blood cells, white blood cells, muscle cells, fat cells, nerve cells, totaling approximately 100 trillion cells in an average adult. These cells come in a variety of sizes and shapes with different functions and life expectancies. Each cell possesses organelles such as ribosomes, mitochondria, Golgi apparatus, endoplasmic reticulum, and a nucleus. We hear that word, a trillion, a lot now in relation to our debt, but I think we've really been desensitized to how much that is. Used to be we thought about millions being a lot. Now, millions of dollars. Government blew $1 million on ketchup testing or something like that. We don't think anything of it anymore, but a trillion, that's a lot. You think about it, if we go back to when we were talking about the origin of the earth and how most creationists think that the earth is between 5,000 and 6,000 years old. If you take that time, say it's 5,000 years, there hasn't been a trillion seconds in that 5,000 years. That's how many a trillion is. It's a huge number. So when you think about your body having about 100 trillion cells, that's just hard to even imagine. But anyway, all these parts of a cell, they play vital roles in keeping the organism alive. While all of these microscopic organelles point to an intelligent designer, the truly amazing, intricate complexity of a cell is within the nucleus. And we've all heard about DNA. And Kendra and Wyatt were wanting me to use that little dancing DNA from Jurassic Park movies for this, but I decided not to. But if transcribed into English, the chemical code for DNA in the human body would fill a 300-volume set of encyclopedias of approximately 2,000 pages each. Yet, just as amazing is the fact that all the genetic information needed to reproduce the entire human population of around 6 billion people could be placed into a space of about 1/8 of a cubic inch. The intricate and complex nature of the DNA molecule, combined with the staggering amount of chemically coded information that it contains, it speaks unerringly to the fact that this is a supermolecule, and that this supermolecule just simply could not have come into existence due to a blind chance or random natural forces. No matter how much time you give it, it had to come from somewhere. But yet evolutionists claim this is not the case. This is not an adequate explanation for the inherent complexity of the DNA molecule. Think about, does the coded information that's in that DNA molecule, does it happen by chance? Could it happen by chance? And could the decoding system, or the RNA, just happen by chance as well? I think we'd all agree it could not. So here we have the body's tissues. In the human body, there are numerous tissues, muscle tissues, nerve tissues, all kinds. In fact, a single human has more than 600 muscles, containing about 6 billion muscle fibers, composing about 40% of the body's weight. Muscles are the engines that the body uses to provide the power for movement. Some muscles are tiny, such as those regulating the amount of light entering the eye, while others, like those in the legs, are massive. Muscles may be classified as either as voluntary, or, for example, under the control of the human will, or involuntary, which is not under control of the will. The voluntary muscles of the arms, for example, are attached to the bones through tough cords of connective tissue called tendons. So one must think in order to move these muscles. The involuntary muscles are those that, it's the ones whose contraction and relaxation are not controlled consciously. Think about your heart, your intestines. Some muscles are both voluntary and involuntary. Think about your muscles that are controlling your eyelids and the diaphragm. All muscles, in one way or another, are regulated by the nervous system. The design inherent in voluntary and involuntary muscles it's incredible. And any of you that are heavily involved in the medical field surely understand that. If it's clear that an automobile engine was intelligently designed, why is it not reasonable to draw the same conclusion with reference to muscles? John Linehan, even though an evolutionist, he wrote, "The body's engines, muscles, demonstrate some surprisingly modern engineering ideas." Who initiated these engineering ideas? And the answer, of course, is the great engineer, God. So we'll talk about the skin a little bit here. The skin is the largest single organ of the human body. It consists of 3 areas: the skin layers, the glands, and the nails. If the skin of a 150-pound man were spread out, it would cover 20 square feet of space and weigh about 9 pounds. The skin is also a very busy area. A piece of skin the size of a quarter contains 1 yard of blood vessels, 4 yards of nerves, 25 nerve ends, 100 sweat glands, and more than 3 million cells. The skin absorbs ultraviolet rays from the sun and uses them to convert chemicals into vitamin D, which the body needs for the utilization of calcium. It retains the fluids that are within our bodies, and yet still is permeable enough for perspiration to penetrate in order to cool the body. And the skin is the primary means of defense against bacteria and other harmful organisms. Man has yet to develop a durable material that can perform the many functions that the skin carries out on a daily basis. Let's talk about the eye a little bit. I didn't put a real eye up there because that makes some people creeps them out when you see it up close. But one of the most forceful evidences of design within the human body is the eye. Even Charles Darwin struggled with the problem of an organ so complex that so complex as the eye, involving via naturalistic processes. In his book, The Origin of Species, he wrote, "To suppose that the eye, with all its inimitable contrivances for adjusting the focus to different distances, for admitting different amounts of light, and for the correction of spherical and chromatic aberration, could have been formed by natural selection, seems, I freely confess, absurd in its highest sense." However, in spite of his misgivings, Darwin went on to argue that the eye had, in fact, been produced by natural selection through an evolutionary process. Darwin, of course, is not the only one to be troubled by what appears to be obvious evidence of design in the human eye. Evolutionist Robert Jastrow lamented, "The eye is a marvelous instrument resembling a telescope of the highest quality, with a lens an adjustable focus, a variable diaphragm for controlling the amount of light, and optical corrections for spherical and chromatic aberration. The eye appears to have been designed. No designer of telescopes could have done better. How could this marvelous instrument have evolved by chance through a succession of random events? So even renowned evolutionists cannot explain some of these things that are within our own human bodies, that they can't explain how they could have happened through evolution. Considering how extremely complex the mechanism of the eye is known to be, it's easy to understand why Dr. Jastrow would make such a comment. Light images from the environment enter the eye. We'd all know the speed of light at 186,000 miles per second. It enters through the iris, which opens and shuts like a diaphragm of a camera to let in just the right amount of light. The images move through a lens that focuses the picture in inverted form on the retina at the rear of the eyeball. The image then is picked up by some 137 million nerve endings that convey the message at over 300 miles per hour to the brain for processing. It's little wonder that secular writers are prone to speak of the miraculous teamwork of your eye and your brain. And those are their words. If the function of the camera demands that it was made, does it not likewise stand to reason that the more complex human camera, the eye, also must have a maker? Okay, how about the ear? And how are we on time? Getting close. Another evidence of design is the ear, which is composed of three areas: an outer, middle, and inner. Makes sense. Sound waves enter the outer ear at 1,087 feet per second and pass along a tube to the middle ear. Stretched out across the tube is a thin membrane, the eardrum. The sound waves hit this tissue and cause it to vibrate. These vibrations are then conveyed in the inner ear, or to the inner ear, where they in turn cause vibrations in three small bones known as the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup, that are joined together and operated by tiny muscles. The result is that the sound is amplified. These bones, which one authority says are designed to transmit even very faint sounds, are connected to another membrane, the oval window. As it vibrates, it generates movement within a single spiral passage, the cochlea, which is filled with liquid. These vibrations, they're picked up by some 25,000 auditory receptors and transferred as electrical impulses by means of the auditory nerve with its 30,000 nerve fibers. That is then transmitted to the brain. The brain receives these vibrations up to 25,000 per second and interprets them as voice, thunder, music, or thousands of other sounds that we hear daily. The complexity of this integrated system is nothing short of phenomenal. One writer noted, amazingly, the inner ear, although no bigger than a hazelnut, contains as many circuits as the telephone system of a good-sized city. Would anyone suggest that a city's telephone system could design itself? The balancing ability of the auditory system has been compared to the inertia system used in missiles and submarines. Thus, the ear mechanism actually is designed to accomplish two functions: hearing and balance. In the words of Linehan, the combination in such a small space of the hearing and balancing systems of the body represents a remarkable achievement of biological engineering. Does blind nature have the ability to engineer such remarkable technology? How about the skeletal system? As a specific example of bone design, consider the bones of the foot. 1/4 of all the bones of the body's bones are actually in our feet. Each human foot contains 26 bones. The feet have been designed to facilitate a number of mechanical functions. They support using arches similar to those found in an engineered bridge. They operate as levers, as in those occasions when one presses an automobile accelerator pedal. They act like hydraulic jacks when a person tiptoes. They catapult a person as he jumps. And feet act as a cushion for the legs when one is running. All of these features are quite helpful, especially in view of the fact that an average person will walk about 65,000 miles in his or her lifetime, and that's equivalent to traveling around the world more than 2.5 times. The human skeletal system demonstrates brilliant design, which shows that there must have been a brilliant designer behind it. The circulatory system, which consists of the heart, arteries, arterioles, vessels, capillaries, depending on how you want to pronounce it, have several functions. First, it transports digested food particles to the various parts of the body. Second, it takes oxygen to the cells for burning food, thus producing heat and energy. And thirdly, it picks up waste materials and carries them to the organs that eliminate them from the body. The heart is an involuntary muscle that beats about 100,000 times a day, or nearly 40 million times in a year. It pumps about 1,800 gallons of blood a day. In a lifetime, a heart will pump some 600,000 metric tons of blood. Evolutionists Miller and Good conceded that for a pump that is keeping two separate circulatory systems going in perfect synchronization, it is hard to imagine a better job of engineering. Yet this amazing device, which they admitted is hard to describe as anything short of a miracle, they say was produced by blind forces. And we only have another minute here, and I think we can finish this for tonight, so we're not too far behind. The brain, we're talking about the nervous system here. The brain, located in a protective case, the skull, is the most highly specialized organ in the body. The late Isaac Asimov, well-known science writer and humanist, once stated that man's brain is the most complex and orderly arrangement of matter in the universe. Who arranged it? Paul Davies, an atheistic professor of mathematics and physics, observed that the human brain is the most developed and complex system known to science. It is not just the brain that is difficult to explain by evolution. Were space to permit, we could examine numerous other body systems, the digestive system, reproductive system, countless others, which provides clear and compelling evidence of design. Atheistic philosopher Paul Ricci has suggested, although many have difficulty understanding the tremendous order and complexity of functions of the human body, the eye, for example, there is no obvious designer. The only people who have difficulty understanding the tremendous order and complexity found in the creation are those that have refused to have God in their knowledge. And such people, they can parrot the phrase that there is no obvious designer, but when you look at the actual evidence, their arguments are far, far from convincing. And that is where we will wrap it up for this week. Next week, we're going to look at Genesis 1 through chapters 1 through 11, talking about whether they're mythical or historical. Thank you for your time.